Hello there, and welcome to News Voice. I'm Keith Foster, here with another video cast from News Voice, the news app, which brings you news from the broadest supply of sources you're ever likely to find. Democratizing the news, bursting your little filter bubble. Today we're going to be talking about cannabis, or marijuana, which is the same thing, really. And I don't really know why it's got two names, but there you go. I'll try and use cannabis in the intro anyway, so we won't get confused. There are lots of figures about cannabis. Let me give you one or two of those. California made medical use of cannabis legal back in 1996. And right now there are 29 states in the US where medical use of cannabis is legal, and 9 states in which recreational use of the drug is also legal. Now, the industry is booming. Sales were valued at $3.8 billion in 2017, and they are projected to be 10 times that much in 2024. California tops the list of states with income from sales of $2.75 billion. And you might think, well, California, I expected that. But other states like Washington and Colorado are also topping the $1 billion mark. Now, Canada has made recreational cannabis legal, and Mexico looks like it will soon follow suit. So where does this leave the US, where many states have changed their laws, but on a federal level, cannabis use is still illegal? I talked to Noelle Skodzinski, who back in 2014 started a magazine called Cannabis Business Times. And it was a small magazine with not a big reach, but now it's grown, and it's just been recently voted the magazine of the year by the American Society of Business Publication Editors. So I asked Noelle, what about this dichotomy between the states making cannabis or marijuana legal and the American federal government not?
Well, it doesn't work very well, I can tell you that. I think everyone is kind of perplexed at how it's still federally illegal, medically especially. The U.S. government actually holds a trademark a patent on cannabis for use in treating a neurological disorder. So it's just hypocritical kind of across the board. 64%, 65% of Americans believe marijuana should be legalized. Medically, the number is through the roof. I mean, it's like in the 80s, 90 percentile. So I think federally, the government has just been much slower to respond, and I don't know exactly why. I think that it's, got a lot of conservative members in Congress, and, there's theories that lobbyists from the pharmaceutical industries are kind of pushing not to legalize as well, because it's putting a significant dent in their business.
Mm. And of course, the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, is on a personal level very much anti-marijuana.
Yes. He has said, I believe, that people who use marijuana are bad people. So, yeah, he if he had his way, it would certainly not be legal, and he's tried to put steps in place to kind of hinder the industry as it's progressing.
How do you explain it from the outside? It seems as if, apart from the sort of industry moves forward and back, that there's almost a religious fervor over those who are anti the use of marijuana. We go back to the 1930s when I think the ban first started, that marijuana users were painted as so-called dope fiends. They were demonized in the media and have been up to this day pretty much. How do you account for that, those strong feelings?
Upbringing, I think that people were really brainwashed. I think that cannabis has gotten a completely a bad rap, to put it simply. It's been misrepresented. It's been, categorized in the same category as heroin and LSD, and despite the fact that Americans and people globally have continued to use the drug and consume it recreationally, medically, there's just really not a reason to have it be treated the way it has been. I think that some people just are a little bit unwilling to be open-minded and change their beliefs. And I think that they hear things like, Governor Christie, when he was governor in New Jersey, I'm based in New Jersey, so he kept pushing the gateway drug theory, and people hear things and they believe it, and they don't necessarily fact check things that they hear on the news. They're starting to more, I think, but I think that they're just they hear things and have been kind of it's propaganda against marijuana, and unfortunately, a lot of religious groups fall into that category.
But you would obviously admit there are one or two concerns about the greater use of marijuana. For example, it does have, if you use it too much, it does have some negative medical effects, and people are also worried about the effect on driving. A lot of drivers driving under the influence of marijuana could
Right.
see a major increase in traffic accidents.
The situation here, at least in America, and I believe globally, is that people are using it regardless. So if people are going to be driving while under the influence, those people are going to be doing so whether it's legal or not. I think legalizing it doesn't change that. It's up to individuals to be responsible, and it's the same as alcohol. Did legalizing alcohol make more people drive under the influence? The majority of people hopefully do not. And I think that the legal cannabis industry is very good at making sure that they convey to consumers, especially newcomers who have not consumed it before and might be, considering trying it for the first time, that they convey very clearly, and they're required to do so on labeling, like, do not operate a vehicle or heavy machinery, just as you would under any drug or alcohol. So I'm not convinced at all that legalization would have any negative impact on that.
You talked about the actual industry there, and of course the industry that the magazine seeks to support. Who is the industry? Are we talking about huge companies that are creating, growing, selling marijuana, or is it ma and pa small companies, or is it both?
It's absolutely both. So we conduct a state of the industry report every year. We've done it for 3 years now. So we finally have data that we can kind of track growth and changes in the market. And pretty much consistently across the board over the past 3 years, the number of cultivators that are growing under 5,000 square feet of cultivation space has been about a third of the industry. And then there's multiple ranges after that. But what is interesting is that in the past 2 years, we've seen the number of cultivators that are 80,000 square feet and above has jumped from 7% to 17% this past year.
And some large companies are threatening to move in. I've read somewhere that Coca-Cola was considering a product with cannabis.
Yes. Yeah. Beer companies are partnering with cannabis companies now, exploring non-alcoholic beer with cannabinoids in it, or just beverages across the board are really skyrocketing, really drawing interest. There's pretty much a lot of mainstream companies now, I think at this point, whereas it really wasn't the case 2 years ago, are much more comfortable delving into the industry because of public support, the number of states that have legalized, the number of states that will be legalizing. It's become a lot more acceptable. So I think that's kind of spearheading the change. There's definitely a fear that large corporations are going to come in and just kind of take over the industry. There's talk of craft cannabis, whether those cultivators and dispensaries will still have a place in the market. I believe they will. The challenge is what I think is prohibiting a lot of growth, even among the smaller cultivators and dispensaries, is the U.S. federal prohibition. Look at taxes. There are, it's basically treated like they're drug dealers. They can't deduct taxes that normal businesses can. So it's significantly hindering their businesses and their ability to grow.
Who's using this cannabis? I've read lots of figures about college students, for example, their intake of alcohol, according to the latest figures, fell from 4.3% daily in 2016 to just 2.2% in 2017. So students are drinking less and using or smoking marijuana more. And millennials are using less alcohol in general than past generations, and certainly less beer. It's been a bad time for beer last year. So is it a young market?
It depends, I think, if you're looking at the adult use recreational market as opposed to the medical. So medically, and just because, in the United States, with so many states having medical programs, actually a large portion of that has been seniors. They are, there was a report, and I can't remember off the top of my head how much reduction, but I think among seniors, I want to say like 30% reduction in purchase of prescription opiates for pain. I think the senior population has been a big driver in the medical market, although, I think younger people probably are the larger consumers. I think the median age is somewhere around 30 or something like that.
You mentioned the gateway drug idea earlier on, that marijuana was seen as the first step towards the inevitable heroin addiction. Has that been totally debunked in your view, that argument, or do you think there is a sliver of truth in there?
No, I don't think there is at all. I think it's been another means of propagating the anti-marijuana movement. I think that people genuinely believed that, but the National Institute on Drug Abuse has completely disproven that. There is absolutely no correlation between marijuana, and in fact, they found that the majority of marijuana users do not go on to get into what they call harder drug substances. Cannabis is being used, and there is absolutely no reason why people should not, enjoy the benefits of that as a society and regulate it and keep people out of prisons and stop wasting federal money, state money on arresting people and putting them in jail for consuming. So. Especially when it's a less harmful drug than alcohol. People are kind of up in arms about marijuana sometimes, but you cannot overdose on marijuana. And a lot of people don't believe that. I actually got into an argument with my sister about it. She said, I just don't believe that's true. So, she went home and looked it up, and it is true. It would take something like the equivalent of 60,000 joints to cause you to overdose on marijuana, and that's impossible to consume that much in a short period of time. So whereas there are 60,000 plus alcohol related deaths in the country every year. So I think perspectives just need to adjust. I think the facts need to get out there a little more. And certainly I appreciate you having me on here and you sharing this with your audience. And I think it's really up to people to kind of research on their own. And so they learn more and just don't automatically think one way or another. Just look up the facts.
Do you think the US could become a more mellow country?
I think so. I think all countries could.
I guess everybody who talks to you asks if you have any samples. Is that right?
Yes, that's really the most common question I get. It's been, can I share any samples with them? But we don't get samples, unfortunately.
Noelle Skodzinski there, who is the editorial director of the Cannabis Business Times and Cannabis Dispensary, two magazines in the same stable. Right, let's move on just briefly from cannabis now, and let me just tell you about News Voice, which is a news app which seeks to break out of people's filter bubbles by giving you news from pretty much the broadest supply of sources you're likely to find. So go to your app store and download News Voice, and soon you'll find that you can not just read the news, but also partake in spreading the news. You can suggest stories yourself if you have a couple of credible sources for those stories. You can upvote stories or comments that you think are good. And you can also write summaries for stories on the app itself. So you're becoming your own journalist, really. So that's what you can do. Why don't you go along and do it? I've done it and I like it a lot. I'm Keith Foster. Thank you very much for being with us. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.